Hi, I'm Hudson, and this is Hudson Institute's deep dive from Jerusalem and Washington, D.C. Without further ado, I'll introduce my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Mike Duran, who is the director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East and a senior fellow at Hudson Institute, formerly, of course, a senior director at the National Security Council for the MENA region at the White House. Mike, it's great seeing you.
Great being here. And we're doing this on July 4th, so happy Independence Day.
Indeed, we're recording just a couple of days before our airing, since we do air this program on Monday in multiple channels across the United States. But nonetheless, the topic of today is going to be very relevant for the days, weeks, months ahead. And therefore, stay tuned as we are going to discuss much of the complexities from a geostrategic level. We'll zoom out as much as possible and then start zooming in into the fine-tunings and nuances that relate to the latest developments throughout the Middle East. And Dr. Duran, I'd like to start with pointing out, of course, roughly or less than 12 days ago, we had a 12-day war. The Israeli-defined Rising Lion operation that was culminated with a operational and tactical achievement by Israel, pushing back on the two core objectives, of course, eradicating much of Iran's weaponization program within its nuclear program and, of course, its ballistic missile capabilities. Give us a brief summary of what we should take out of it.
So, Jonathan, it's no exaggeration to say that there's the Middle East before this operation and the Middle East after. This is a huge tectonic shift in the region now. But let's not go too far in saying that. Israel won this war. But it is not clear yet the extent of the victory. Iran has been downgraded significantly. As you mentioned, the nuclear program has been set back significantly, I think by years, at least 1 year, probably more. The weaponization program has been set back. The uranium enrichment program has been set back. What we don't know yet is what happened to the residuals of the program. Are there residuals, and what's their status? By residuals, I mean uranium enriched to 60%. The Iranians had stockpiles. Did they squirrel some of those stockpiles away to a safe location that wasn't hit by the Israelis? We don't know. Or is it all encapsulated in the destruction of Fordo and Natanz? We don't know yet. But there is a possibility that they have some intact centrifuges that were not installed but stored somewhere that the Israelis didn't know about, and they have enriched uranium. And from that, they could reconstitute a small program. But given all of the destruction that's taken place, all of the people who were killed, it's going to take them, even with those residuals, some time to get it back up and going. So we don't know. Here's what we don't know. We don't know what's left of the program. And then secondly, we don't know what the Iranians intend to do with it. They're still in shock. They've had their nose broken. You know, if this is a boxing match, they've had their nose broken and they've been knocked down to their knees. They're not out, but they're trying to recover, understand what happened to them. And we don't know if what's going to emerge after this conflict is a somewhat chastened Islamic Republic or an Islamic Republic that is going to operate as we've always known it, hostile to the West, hostile to Israel, looking to disrupt everything around everything that it regards as hostile to its interests around the region, resorting to terrorism and all kinds of other dirty tricks. I think we should assume the worst. But if we get something better, that would be, that would be welcome. I don't think we should expect that though. And then the last thing we don't know, Jonathan, is the status of the ballistic missile program. This, in some ways, is the most important question because the ballistic missile program posed the greatest threat to Israel. As you mentioned in your opening comments, the Israeli goals in the war, the stated goals in the war were two: destroy the nuclear weapons program and destroy the ballistic missiles program. Last October, the Israelis took the medium range ballistic missile production capability of the Iranians off of the offline. They took out critical components of the production capacity of the Iranians, and they calculated then the Israelis calculated that they had set back the program by a year at least. But what happened was the Chinese stepped in and provided machinery and key ingredients for the solid fuel propellant of these medium-range ballistic missiles. And that allowed the Iranians to ramp up production very quickly after the Israeli strikes. And that's one of the things that propelled the Israelis to go to war, because they saw that the Iranians were going to build an arsenal of conventional weapons that could penetrate their defenses that was on par with a nuclear weapon. I mean, the destructive power of those missiles was on par with a nuclear weapon, and so they felt they had to take them out. We don't know now if the Chinese are going to step in again and help the Iranians to reconstitute themselves. So the Iranians are knocked down. They're weakened. They're a little bit shocked. They're trying to figure out, get their bearings again. But we can't assume that they're out of the game. Meanwhile, though, everyone sees that they have been weakened, despite all of their statements to the contrary, and everyone is adjusting accordingly, and that's what's creating a new world.
So you touched on many of the points that we should have focused on, indeed, and I appreciate that. I think that we can say with confidence that Iran doesn't know what is the status of its enrichment program. It is still engaged with its own battle damage assessment. I do suspect that Israel knows more than the Iranians know, and since the Israelis know more, naturally also their allies and partners know more, to include, of course, the United States as the key and strategic power of the state of Israel. With regard to the Chinese, right now the Iranians are frantic in their engagement to try and buy everything off the shelf, because they are not only stripped naked from a defensive perspective, but also offensively. Just to put things in perspective, at one of the nights of those 12 days, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, came out and declared that there will rain 1,000 ballistic missiles upon Israel. That same night, I was waiting for those 1,000 ballistic missiles, and lo and behold, only one was shot. So it does indicate that there is a large gap between what the Iranians can actually do to what they claim to be able to do, and we need also to put things in perspective on that. With regard to whether or not they're going to rehabilitate those capabilities, naturally, that is their intention. But nevertheless, we just heard Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz bringing all of the general staff into his office and highlighting to them to prepare for plans to enforce the red lines of Jerusalem, particularly when it comes to Iranian efforts to potentially break out to a nuclear weapon, or potentially once again reach saturating their ballistic missile arsenal. And last but not least, I think that it is important to highlight that all of this is good and well, but so long as there is no clear political will in the United States of America, namely in the White House, to enforce any type of arrangement that would ultimately frustrate Iranian aspirations to reach their malign aspirations, it won't happen. So we do need to have a clear relationship between Jerusalem and Washington with a focused goal. We saw just over the course of the past 72 hours, the commander of Central Command, General Michael Kurilla, visiting Israel and holding consultations on those matters. Mike, how do you see that, and to what degree is this clear advantage when we're seeing democracies having a unity of thought and united in purpose. Nobody can frustrate their ambitions. But in this context, there is a vigorous soft power campaign raging not only in Israel, but also in the United States.
Well, you put a lot on the table there, Jonathan. Let me just hit these several different points that you raised. And let me start back with your point about Israel knows the damage to Iran better than Iran knows the damage. I'm sure that's true. Uh, just because it's going to take time for a full stock taking by the Iranians, but also, and I have this on very good authority from Israelis who know, the Iranians are lying to each other about what happened. And
Absolutely.
you in that statement by Ali Khamenei that you just mentioned, where he promised 1,000 missiles and he got one. the the he himself is not being told the truth by his subordinates about how badly everything was set back. Nobody wants to take bad news to the boss in this in this system.
The weakness of totalitarian regimes, right?
There's two things going on simultaneously with these statements. The Iranians don't want to look weak before their own people. They're afraid of an uprising. They're afraid of fracture of factions developing within the regime and starting to battle with each other, and they're afraid of their own public. So there's from the center there's a desire to say we're still here, we're tough, we won, and that's the line we're taking. And if anyone says we didn't win, then you know that they're not true, they're not loyal to the existing order. So there's that internal dynamic going on, but on top of that, there is also real lack of understanding of what just happened to them, and it's going to take time for that to seep in. Their their complete, again, to use your word, nakedness before the Israelis will not go away. You cannot you cannot reconstitute an air and missile defense system in a month, 2 months, 5 months, a year. This is something that takes a very long time, and there are no existing sources of supply for the Iranians that are combat tested against the capabilities that Israel and the United States have. The Russians don't have such capabilities. The Iranians don't have such capabilities. We've seen that now. This is what this whole laboratory between Israel and Hezbollah, Israel and Iran, has shown us over the last 18, 20 months. The only possible power in the world that might have capabilities that could be challenging to the Israelis is and would be willing to supply them to the Iranians potentially are the Chinese, but they're not going to do that. The Chinese need those capabilities against the United States. We don't know. They're not combat tested, the Chinese capabilities. So we don't even know whether they're a match for American capabilities and Israeli capabilities. The Chinese are not going to deliver them to the Iranians so that we can find out, right? And so that the United States and Israel can have an opportunity when battling Iran to overcome the Chinese the Chinese capabilities. So bottom line, Iran is going to remain naked, and this is going to soak in the coming weeks and months, and we'll see how they decide to deal with that problem. On the American side, you mentioned that that there's a soft power problem with regard to U.S.-Israeli cooperation against Iran. I mean, the Israelis want to turn Iran into Lebanon. And by that, I mean there's a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel. But Israel has said very clearly to Hezbollah, that we have certain red lines. If we see you amassing forces in certain areas or in certain ways, we will destroy those forces. We won't hesitate to act. Israel totally has the upper hand there, and it has made it very clear that its hand will be stayed only if Hezbollah avoids certain kinds of activities. They want to do the same. The Iranians want to do the same thing in Iran. They want to say to the Iranians, "We won't attack. We have the ability to attack you at will. We will not attack you unless you start to reconstitute certain capabilities. If you do, we're going to come take them out." It's harder for Israel to impose that kind of regime on Iran than on Lebanon for two reasons. One is the great distance between Israel and Iran that complicates matters. And the second is, as your question suggests, American policy. Will the not just American policy, but the international arena, will the Americans, Saudis, Turks, when talking together, will they be comfortable with this? And will the United States support the Israelis? We have to wait and see. I don't think that a lot of the hesitation and deliberation in America leading up to the use of force by the United States in the 12-day war is going to be as applicable here in the moving forward as it was in the last few weeks. Because the big question, Jonathan, in American politics is the United States going to get directly involved? Are American women and men going to be put in harm's way by this conflict? And I think we see now that Donald Trump has carried out a very judicious surgical strike against Iranian nuclear capabilities. From here on out, I think all the heavy lifting can be done by Israel. That's much less damaging to the United States. And I suspect we have to wait and see. Prime Minister Netanyahu is coming to Washington to discuss just this kind of thing with President Trump. By the time we air, he'll be in Washington, and I suspect that Donald Trump is going to have an attitude toward Iran that's very much like his attitude toward Lebanon, which is, it's your problem, Israel, not ours.
Well, if I may quote Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, give us the tools and we'll finish the job. I think this is something that Jerusalem has been quite clear about when it comes to the Islamic Republic of Iran, being quite vigorous in its approach and willing to do what is necessary to ensure that this regime will not gain the tools necessary to wreak havoc, not just around the Middle East, but beyond, and also frustrate the rules-based order that is, quite frankly, a U.S. interest, let alone the breakout to a nuclear weapon would bring an end to the Non-Proliferation Treaty that would deliver an arms race that would not be in the box for the United States and will cause a lot more challenges than what the United States wants to handle in the long run. So there are various considerations here to be taken into this. But when we're talking about Iran proper, and we'll talk about this briefly since I also want to touch about the big winner of this whole campaign. But nonetheless, when we're talking specifically about the complexities at hand with regard to Iran, with regard to the Middle East, we always need to think about the end of March 27 to 29 during the summit held between State Counselor of China Wang Yi and Secretary of State or Antony Blinken rather, during the course of which a Chinese top diplomat highlighted to his American counterpart that Beijing and Washington are near peer nations, namely China and the United States, and strategic power competition commenced, in which China very strongly is seeking to replace the United States as the hegemon of the 21st century. To what degree are we looking at implications from the latest developments here in the region, particularly vis-a-vis Iran, to that global strategic power competition?
Well, I think that that the Chinese see Iran as a very important partner for them in projecting their power and influence into the Middle East. They benefit greatly from the disruptive capabilities of the Iranians, and they don't want to see the Iranians taken off the board. However, I think both in Moscow and in Beijing, there's frustration at the Iranians. The Iranians clearly overplayed their hands. The Iranians clearly thought they were more powerful than they were, miscalculated, tremendously miscalculated. And part of their miscalculation also was American policy in all of this. So on the one hand, let's say Putin and Xi Jinping are not going to be, rushing to associate themselves really closely with this military failure of the Iranians, and we saw that, during the war. They kept their distance to a certain extent. On the other hand, they don't want to see Iran obliterated, a revolution in Iran, and they want Iran to reconstitute itself. The Iranian capabilities are very important to the Chinese because they divert U.S. resources, particularly naval resources, from East Asia to the Middle East, and also the Chinese have been using the Houthis as as a laboratory for understanding relations between the missile program of the Iranians and, or let's say, the vulnerabilities of American naval assets to missile attack, which is very important for the Chinese with regard to Taiwan. There are only two entities in the world that have an anti-ship ballistic missile. Those two entities are the Houthis and the Chinese. And there's a reason for that. The anti-ship ballistic missile has one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to sink an American aircraft carrier. And so the Chinese have been watching very closely as the Houthis have been carrying out their campaign in the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. And they have been helping it quietly with targeting data they have delivered to the Houthis, but also these capabilities that I mentioned. After last October, when the Israelis took the missile production of the Iranians offline, the Chinese stepped in to make sure that it was back and running very quickly. So I would expect, if I had to predict, I would expect the Chinese are going to move in very quickly to help the Iranians on their missile program. That's the number one thing of interest to the Chinese here. I don't think they're going to. I don't think they're eager to see. They're eager to see the nuclear program. This is not something that's of vital interest to the Chinese, and the Chinese may even calculate that it's not of interest to them. I don't know exactly how they see it, but they're not going to rush on to help them on that. And like I said, for prudential reasons, they're not gonna do too much to help the Iranians with their air defenses. And even if they did, it takes a long time to set up a good air defense system. You can't do this in a week, a month, 2 months.
Well, China views the Middle East as a graveyard for empires, which is something that really causes them to be very cautious about its involvement in the Middle East. And one point that I completely agree with everything you said, but one point that I will highlight, and that is China would not assist Iran in the proliferation of its ballistic missiles for the sake of having those ballistic missiles necessarily, but rather about the R&D and the sharing of information about the defensive capabilities of their adversaries, namely Israel, the United States, and others, which is what the Chinese are more keenly interested in. Something that I've had a couple of discussions on, particularly with senior officials both here as well as practitioners abroad. So that is quite interesting.
Can I jump in there, Jonathan?
We will lose our time for the big winner, but go ahead and jump immediately also into the big winner. You have 2 minutes for all of that. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say, on the basis of what you just said, or in reaction to what you just said, this is why I personally don't like the way the United States announced a ceasefire. We allowed the Iranians to shoot ballistic missiles at our base, and in order not to save face, and then proclaim a ceasefire. Um, I didn't like it because I don't think we should be in the job of helping them to save face. But more than that, every time the Iranians shoot missiles at our base, they take or at the Israelis, they collect enormous data that is very useful to them. They've gotten more and more effective at breaking through our defenses because of all of this data that they collect. There should be, from an American point of view, if you shoot ballistic missiles at American bases, you should pay a very heavy price for that. We shouldn't give away these. We don't get this. We don't do this for free. It costs money, costs millions of dollars to shoot down these ballistic missiles. But we're also giving away information that helps the enemy. So this should, in the future, we should make it very clear to the Iranians that we're not going to play that game anymore.
Mike, 45 seconds, the big winner, unveil Turkey. Go ahead. Really, 45 seconds. Go ahead.
The big winner is Turkey. The Turks, President Erdogan made some fiery anti-Israeli speeches during this war, but he didn't do anything to obstruct the air bridge over Syria between Israel and Iran. And that air bridge also helped the United States to deliver those massive ordnance penetrators to Fordo. They understood that a weakened Iran opens up all kinds of opportunities for Turkey around the region. We're going to have some friction between Israel and Turkey coming, I think. Hopefully, the United States will mediate between that. But the two big winners coming out of this are Israel and Turkey.
Absolutely. I think it also will emerge. There will be emerging challenges for Turkey since a diminished Iran in the Caucasus would bring Russia into the fold as well, since it has its own interest there. And this might also cause some friction between Turkey and Russia. But we'll have to wait and see. Dr. Mike Duran, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. This has been Hudson Institute's Deep Dive from Jerusalem and Washington, D.C. Until our next edition. Shalom.